Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me one quick favor, see that little black subscribe button on the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Really does help this channel grow, my audience grow, and I appreciate it more than you know. Also, quick thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet $50 on any game. Get up to $1,111 in free bets courtesy of the Betfred Sportsbook. Thank you again. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Let's keep it going. Let's stay in the SEC. And for the first time this year, we get a signature, meaningful game featuring the Georgia Bulldogs. Oh, I don't know, the reigning two-time national champions that we essentially have not talked about all season long since the offseason ended. This is a 3:30 Eastern game, CBS Game of the Week. By the way, shout out, the last premiere of the SEC on CBS. SEC goes away off of CBS starting next year. And I do think, by the way, Brad Nessler, Gary Danielson are probably through the moon. They had Ohio State at Indiana 2 weeks ago, total snoozer. They had UNLV Michigan last week, which may have been an even bigger snoozer. Now they get some real SEC football. Georgia hosting the Gamecocks. Georgia is a 27.5-point favorite. The over-under set at 54. In terms of Georgia, there just really hasn't been that much to talk about because obviously the competition has been UT Martin and Ball State early, have taken care of business in 2 games. But if you actually watch the games and didn't just look at box scores, I don't want to say that Georgia was ever like in any threat in any way, shape, or form, but there have been some good and some bad things on either side. From the Georgia positive perspective, the thing that stands out, Carson Beck has been really good. And this goes back to something we talked about in the preseason. Carson Beck was never a concern at Georgia. Quarterback was never a concern at Georgia. I talked about it in the offseason, know some people relatively close to that program. And they said, frankly, like Carson Beck was ready for this opportunity a year ago. Stetson Bennett ends up using his extra year of COVID eligibility. But the bottom line being is that if Carson Beck had been called into action a season ago as the full-time starter, he would have been ready, and he has looked the part so far. 77% completion percentage. And what's become clear watching Georgia, they got a lot of weapons at the wide receiver position. And obviously the tight end position as well. We know about Brock Bowers. He's going to be a top 10 pick in the draft. Oscar Delp, another really good tight end. Oh, by the way, on top of that, Dominic Lovett, the transfer from Missouri, has been really good. Ra Thomas, the transfer from Mississippi State, has been really good. Mekhi Muse has been really good. Marcus Rosemy, Jack Saint was back last week and looked really good. So from the Georgia perspective, that pass game does look solid. Carson Beck and all those receivers. That's the positive. The negative, the run game has left a little bit to be desired. And yes, there's been a lot of Mike Bobo commentary on social media, as there tends to be when things don't go great. And we know about the history with Mike Bobo and the Georgia Bulldogs. But last week against Ball State, Georgia, how about this? 99 yards rushing on 28 carries. 99 yards rushing on 28 carries. That is not the Georgia that we know. And that obviously has to get cleaned up because you're going to have to be able to move the ball on the ground more effectively as the season goes on. Through 2 games, they have not done that. 93rd nationally in rushing, 65th in yards per carry. Those ain't your grandfather's Georgia Bulldogs. Those aren't the 2022, 2021 Georgia Bulldogs. They need to improve on that, and they'll have a chance against South Carolina. Speaking of South Carolina, listen, it's kind of the same thing with South Carolina. The pass game has been really good. And I got to give credit where it's due because I was never a Spencer Rattler guy, even coming into the year. I acknowledged he was very good the second half of the year when South Carolina got hot a season ago, when they beat Tennessee at home, when they beat Clemson on the road, when they finished the season very strongly. But even going into the season, I said, are we sure Spencer Rattler's been that good? Well, Spencer Rattler has been that good. Through 2 games, one against North Carolina, last week against Furman. How about this? 83% completion percentage, 698 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions. Problem for South Carolina, as good as that pass game has been, the run game has been abysmal. And if you watch that North Carolina, South Carolina game to open the season, it was really, really, really bad. And frankly, I thought South Carolina just got completely outclassed. North Carolina isn't exactly known for its defensive prowess. Now, they always have good players on defense, but the scheme hasn't always been there. And North Carolina just did what they wanted at the line of scrimmage. South Carolina finished with -2 yards rushing in that game. And then you say, oh, maybe North Carolina's defensive line is just better than we thought. South Carolina averaged 2.8 yards per carry, against Furman last week. So that is not a good sign, and that is not a good trend going forward. In terms of this game, I'll be blunt. This is one, listen, I'll just be clear. I'm not going to bet it, but my lean is that Georgia wins pretty convincingly. First of all, I just don't think, and I know Kirby Smart in the offseason talked a lot about, hey, we don't have the guys that can get to the quarterback like we have the last few years, or they haven't emerged yet at the very least. And I know, by the way, they have some injuries. Javon Bullard, the star defensive player, MVP of the national championship game last year, was banged up coming out of last week. Ladd McConkey banged up coming out of last week. But there's two things that kind of come to mind as far as why I do like Georgia. First one, I think it's a bad matchup. If you can't run the ball, if you can't be multifaceted, I don't think you can beat Georgia. I listen, I know that South Carolina, to its credit, over the last couple of years, they have been a big game hunting team at South Carolina under Shane Beamer. Shane Beamer even talked this week. He was asked about being a 4-touchdown favorite. He said, look, we were something close to that against Tennessee last year, and we smacked them around. We were something close to that against Clemson, and we beat them. So I don't think Shane Beamer's intimidated. I don't think that South Carolina's players are intimidated, but I do think we have to call a spade a spade. And when I look at this situation, I just sit there and say, if you can't run the ball, I don't know how you have success against Georgia, because if those edge rushers can just pin their ears back and go after Spencer Rattler like they did last year, it can get ugly. And then I also think from the Georgia perspective, week 3, they haven't really been let loose by that coaching staff, right? Most of these teams are using these early season games as kind of almost preseason exhibition type games. They're not. They count in the standings. But you look at what Michigan's done. You look at what Alabama did against Middle Tennessee, what Texas A&M did against New Mexico. You work on stuff. You try to improve on stuff. This is the game where I think Kirby Smart just gets to unleash the dogs, no pun intended. And you get to go out there and you get to really just go after a team in the SEC, in your division, a rival. And I think it could get ugly. I'm not going to officially pick this game. I'm not going to officially bet it because Georgia, has not been great running the football. I think they do have success this week, though. I think they win somewhere big too. I just don't see the scenario where South Carolina is able to move the ball. I say somewhere in the neighborhood of like a 34-3 type win for Georgia. I think it gets ugly. I think they dominate. I think they go into another bye game next week before the heart of SEC play.